And I don't think this will ever be repeated. And the fact that everyone now appreciates, starting with His Excellency the President himself, saying that he will respect institutions, independent institutions, and that's what we stood strong as ODPP, as independent institutions, despite threats, despite coercion. You know very well that my house was broken into at the last few months before election. I did not say much, but I was coerced. I was meant and I was pushed to feel as if I was a second citizen in this country, despite the fact that I'm a Kenyan. Basically, because people wanted to bend the constitution to serve their own interests. So, but I stood firmly, despite all those threats.
Director of Public Prosecutions Nuruddin Haji, in an interview with Sophia Wanuna at KTN News that just, brings a spotlight once again to the criminal justice system. We'll get back to him and that conversation in a moment. But there cannot be a more stark representation of where we are with the criminal justice system than these pictures. I hope we can show them to you, of convicted Member of Parliament, John Waluke. He's been convicted to 67 years in prison and a fine of how many billions? Slightly over 1 billion. He was being presented there with his certificate from Jubilee Party Chair, Secretary General Jeremiah Kioni, to be part of the Parliamentary Service Commission. Gentlemen, it doesn't get any more interesting than this. Before we talk about it, I think you remember in the discussion, in the planning, we had talked about this. So listen, he's lodging his appeal. But as it stands now, he's convicted for 67 years. He will be out in the year 2098.
2089. 2089.
2089?
Yeah.
With Kenya's life expectancy, considering where he is at right now, 67 years from now, but yet he's serving in the Parliamentary Service Commission?
Well,
Gachuri?
Put it this way. First of all, the Parliamentary Service Commission slots are available for non-parliamentarians, and they are also available for parliamentarians, the two chambers of the bicameral parliament. And as we speak now, the Azimio team has floated names of Mishi Mboko, Patrick Makau, the MP for Lolongo, that area. Yep. Then Okongo Omogeni, the senator for Nyamira.
Yep.
Actually, Patrick Makau is the MP for Mavoko. And Fatma Dulo. In the list that was submitted, I haven't seen Waluke's name, though Jubilee Party is insisting he's their nominee for Parliamentary Service Commission. Of course, it is parliamentarians who have to vote for these nominees. On the other hand, Kenya Kwanza has Faith Gitau, Muhammad Ali, Senator John Kinyua, and nominated Senator Joyce Korir. But put it this way, do we have a justice system, a criminal justice system that is fair to all?
Yeah.
Of course, the answer is no. Somebody was asking me, how is it that he's not in prison uniform?
Yeah.
Like other convicts?
And he's in a senior prison office.
Officer's office.
This certificate is not being handed like, through the bars or, over the wall or over the fence. He's obviously been accorded some time, in the senior prison's office. I wonder if this same courtesy is extended to other prisoners.
Of course not.
Yeah.
And that's why I said the criminal justice system in our country is not fair. It's not even equitable. It's not equal. It's more of an animal farm setup. Shamba la wanyama. Wanyama wengine ni sawa kuliko wengine. Fact. Suppose it was some guy from my village in Banana who was convicted even to 3 years in prison, not even 67, or even 1 year in prison. Would he have received his nomination certificate to vie for an MCA seat in my ward in Karori? Or to vie for an MCA ward in Osinoni, kwa kina Linas? The answer is no, that would not have happened. But hey, this is John Waluke, a member of parliament. The criminal justice system is not equal for all. We hear all manner of stories about how it works. And the best representation of all those stories that we hear how they work is this. He's in civilian clothes, in a nice office. Ordinarily, let's say the prisoners who have been convicted today, and they have been taken to Kamiti, Kodiaga, Manyani, or Shimolatewa, are they in home clothes?
Listen, he's a member of parliament, he's convicted, his seat has not been declared vacant as yet. Linus, Jubilee is not short of MPs. I mean, to select the Parliamentary Service Commission. What does this say? What does this symbolize?
The optics are not right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Yvonne, this symbolizes what I would call a meeting of minds on the side of all of our politicians. This is a very sad picture because the unity of purpose in their country's political community has been demonstrated, because it amounts to doublespeak to complain about the collapse of prominent cases such as the one that was against Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, and yet you want Waluke, who's been convicted 67 years for corruption-related cases, you want them freed. I think this week what we've seen, and these are remarks that we would attribute to Raila Odinga, the Azimio La Umoja leader. He spoke in Western and said, Waluke should be free, just like those others. Now, this is a dangerous trend, a very dangerous trend in which politicians unite to undermine institutions.
And to protect their own.
And to protect their own and treat their suspects as different from regular suspects. And this is what we are seeing here. Now, it becomes even more worrying when that unity of purpose on the political side then meets institutions that are wobbly. And we played the bite of Director of Public Prosecution the other day, and I just wanted to listen to what he said about being coerced.
Let's listen
through the media. He said something to that effect.
And I don't think this will ever be repeated. And the fact that everyone now appreciates, starting with His Excellency the President himself, saying that he will respect institutions, independent institutions, and that's what we stood strong as ODPP, as independent institutions, despite threats, despite coercion. You know very well that my house was broken into at the last few months before election. I did not say much, but I was coerced. I was meant and I was pushed to feel as if I was a second citizen in this country, despite the fact that I'm a Kenyan. Basically, because people wanted to bend the constitution to serve their own interests. So, but I stood firmly, despite all those threats.
I first find the remarks about being made to feel like a second-class citizen rather sensational, because it's never really been reported that whatever the DPP was going through had ever reached that stage. So that's a really sensational statement that that he was treated like a second-class citizen. But for what looks like the bad relations between the DPP and the then Director of Criminal Investigation, Kinoti, obviously there were a lot of political intrigues. And it looks like after that as well, Kinoti is out, there's a new president in place, we are going to witness more political intrigues. And what we are seeing, and we've had in that interview with Sophia Wanuna, the Director of Public Prosecution saying now he's got goodwill. I heard him say talking about goodwill. This should worry you, considering the scenario I'm painting about the collective determination by the political class to undermine the criminal justice system. And It becomes even more easy if independent officers such as the ODPP cannot stand up
or depend on political goodwill to
What
function?
goodwill are you looking for?
Yeah.
The Constitution of Kenya, written in and promulgated in 2010, actually was supposed to take care and cure this kind of scenarios. And that was how the old arrangement worked. That is why in the old days you really must have the president's name in every second sentence, because that is the only way you could work. Now the Constitution tells you you can't. It's Article 157.
Yeah.
That the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution is totally independent. You don't need political goodwill. You just need evidence. You need facts. And more importantly, you need a spine.
Let me put this in context, because that interview was also coming at a time, perhaps, and he did that to respond to the concerns by Kenyans of the withdrawal of cases of prominent officials or leaders in this country, and the timing as well. Let me just take you through them. The 19 million shillings graft charges against Aisha Juma, who's now a cabinet secretary. She'd been charged with embezzling CDF funds. That case was dropped. There were 117 witnesses who'd been lined up. The case about challenging her education qualifications, well, the petitioners abandoned that after she lost that race. With Mithika Linturi,
and the murder case?
The murder case is still on, but they're reviewing that. We understand there is the possibility of, or at least she's applied, to be state witness. In that case.
And the bodyguard be charged.
And the bodyguard be charged. Mithika Linturi, that sexual assault case against him, the complainant dropped the case, saying they will settle the matter out of court. Ben Chumo, the former Kenya Power MD, charges were dropped. Prosecutor was not willing to proceed with the charges because, according to the DPP, the police failed to conduct proper investigations to indict him. Recall that his trial has been going on since 2018. So they've been looking for evidence whilst he was charged in court from 2018 to date. The case against the now deputy president, Rigathi Gachagua, 7.3 billion shilling fraud case. It is now under review. Then there is a case against Mary Wamboi, a business tycoon. That was a 2.2 billion shillings tax evasion case. The magistrate has granted the DPP until the 5th of December to enable him give the final decision. So these are just some of the cases. They're all high profile. They're all perceived to be leaning towards one side of the political divide. And then there is the blame game now that, in fact, I wasn't getting enough evidence from the DCI. It wasn't sufficient. But then the decision to prosecute lies solely with the DPP.
Yeah.
And so one would start to question why they would be taking cases to prosecute if they didn't have enough evidence and if they didn't meet the threshold that is required, which is provided under Article 157 of the Constitution. Gachuri.
Absolutely. And two words: convenience, interest. If there was coercion, pressure, and blackmail to prosecute, is there coercion to withdraw the charges?
Yeah.
Because if...
And then there was a case where they withdrew and then withdrew the petition to withdraw.
See now?
Yeah.
So if the DPP argues that some of these cases ended up in court because of pressure from DCI and prosecution through the media, then is there any such pressure to withdraw them now? That's a fundamental question. And number two, why now? Why was there no uproar? I don't remember any news conference that was addressed by the DPP to say, I will not prosecute this case because the DCI is insisting, and in my opinion and my review of the file, the evidence that has been presented is not sufficient. Initially, back in the years before the promulgation of the Constitution in 2010, the DPP would work or under instructions from the executive, so to say. And the appointment and the dismissal was a presidential decision. Today, the DPP enjoys security of tenure and independence in terms of his institution.
Yeah.
And so, if there was any coercion or any blackmail, it is blackmail and coercion to a constitutional office holder, an independent office holder, who, Article 157 of the Constitution, says does not require the consent of any person or authority for the commencement of criminal proceedings and in the exercise of his or her powers or functions shall not be under the direction or control of any person or authority. Part 2 of the same article says, in exercising the powers conferred by this article, the Director of Public Prosecutions shall have regard to the public interest, the interest of the administration of justice, and the need to prevent and avoid abuse of the legal process. So, was there at any time the DPP said, I will not prosecute this case because it is an abuse of the legal process? Or I will not prosecute this case even though it has been presented by, or has been brought by the DCI and has been written about by the media, because the public interest question, and number 2, I will not be directed by anyone. Yeah. So those are issues that, in my opinion, come up. And lastly, is it a case of wanting to fit in and look correct?
You know, this is, I guess, a moment for us to reflect on, you know, how things have worked in the criminal justice system. And this is not the first time we're hearing about it. It's coming to light, obviously. But if you recall, former CJ Maraga lamented about the quality of evidence and the long charge sheets, remember? With tens and tens of witnesses. And he said, and I quote, if we're given half-baked cases, we will dismiss them firmly. He also talked about the poor framing of cases, the failure to provide witness statements on time. He said cases were rushed to court, and then prosecution asked for more time, like 30 days, to continue to conduct investigations. And he's not the only one who complained. The Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, Anna Madi, when going before a parliamentary committee, actually said, and I quote, the problem we have is with design of prosecution. Some will never be finalized in 1 year. And I think that was epitomized, obviously, when their all-hailed bromance broke down about 2 years later. I think in March 2020, we started to see, you know, signs that all was not well. When we raised the issues, we were told we were trying to put a wedge, you know, between the two. But do you remember this case where former KPA MD Daniel Manduku and a KRA commissioner were arrested by the DCI for tender fraud? The DCI produced them in court without talking to the DPP. The DPP then declined to press charges, and they were freed after, you know, review. And, you know, that's not the only one. The DCI apparently forwarded a 2.7 billion shillings file to DPP. The probe was on the Makongeni Goodshed project, the Kisumu Port Revitalization project. The DPP took months before ever doing anything with that case. So obviously, there was goodwill that Kenyans had in both the DPP and the DCI, and that was squandered 2 years later. You remember there was the Kamata Fridays. There was such vigor, you know. And then that deteriorated sharply 2 years later. And then now here we are. And on the basis of those alone, you would then start to question every other case that has been investigated, that has been prosecuted. Does it meet the threshold? And ironically, for 2 officers, like you say, that have been guaranteed independence. And so now to start to say, well, you know, I was coerced by the DCI through the media. And in fact, on that, I'd like us to listen to another soundbite from the DPP in that very interview, where he said, you know, he realized the DCI was not serious. So some damning revelations that are coming now after the fact. Let's listen to him.
What we discovered then was that a lot of those cases did not meet the threshold, that the DCI's office, and I'm not saying this because he's out, but I think I stood my ground all through, even when I was threatened and I was taken to court for removal, because I stood by my decision to say that the evidence must be there before I can make that decision to charge. But and that I will no longer depend on good faith, because that good faith was no longer there.
Good faith?
How do you charge by good faith? Which magistrate, which judge?
What does that read in the charge sheet? Like,
yes, I don't know what it looks like on the charge sheet. It could be, I don't know.
To be provided later.
I don't know what good faith looks like. And I think in this particular interview, the DPP really showed a number of lapses. First of all, you know, Francis, you spoke about looking right, looking okay. You know, we have a transition. We've had a transition. We have a new government, and probably some of the officials in government want to sound a certain way so that you sound
politically correct.
Politically correct, because now we have seen the DPP in this last 1 week playing victim. His house has been broken into.
He was threatened.
He was threatened, treated like a second-class citizen. I stood firm. There's a lot of crying victim here on the part of the DPP, and if you look at it broadly on what this would then mean to the criminal justice system, it's actually a very tragic thing because I don't think this is what we should be hearing. We should be hearing from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, because things look precarious. When cases are collapsing in court like that, especially cases about corruption, which we say is the biggest problem in this country, we lose about a third of the national budget to corruption, but somehow cases cannot be sustained in court because of either lack of evidence or, as the DPP says, coercion by other forces. Then it's a very sad thing on the part of the criminal justice system. Let's remember that in times when Kenyans felt their institutions were not working, the judiciary and maybe related institutions, and I want to throw in the office of the DPP in the mix here, have always enjoyed some level of trust that somehow they will hold things together at the end of the day. So these are not nice signs. There need to be more steady hands and a steady voice coming from the office of the DPP, more assuring, more clear, and showing that he's in charge of the things that he's doing. That if a case goes to court, it actually goes because he's doing his job, not because he is adjusting to new times, or there's pressure from the media, or there's something else among the many things that he's listing right now as he plays victim.
Yeah, we've talked about the DPP, the office of the DPP, but then there's also quite a bit of upheaval in the office of the DCI as well. So, you know, we've seen some interesting things after the exit of George Kinoti, including that DCI detective who withdrew an initial affidavit. Yes, in the Todd Cohen, Obadiah Kuria, in the Todd Cohen murder.
He's now the chief, he's now the county criminal investigating officer.
But was it him or John
Obadiah Kuria.
Gashomi?
Then John Gashomo was in charge of operations.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
that was in the Cohen case.
Yes.
And then for the Rigathi case,
it's Kuria.
Yes. So in the Cohen case, you have John Gashomo saying, withdrawing an affidavit that
about Justice Kantai.
He had sworn about Justice Kantai's alleged involvement in the Cohen murder, saying he was coerced by. The word coerced is now the sort of keyword in the
criminal justice system.
Yeah, there's lots of coercion to go around. So you've got that, and then you've got the whole issue with disbanding the Special Services Unit, Gachuri. So, I mean, you know, in the DCI, there's quite a bit of upheaval, in the DPP as well. But let's talk about this disbandment of SSU. They're now in court, they're waiting to take plea. The issue of extrajudicial killings, the bodies in Rivayala that we have been, unearthing day after day, month after month. There's also quite something in DCI, yeah?
Absolutely. And with a new sheriff in town, you can expect quite a number of things to happen. And you remember the discussion last week here on Newsgang? There are those close allies of Kinoti at the directorate who are his close people. The purge will heavily be on them. Quite a number of them are going to face a lot of challenges, whether it is in a certain pattern that will lead to him. And the question is, if that pattern leads to the former DCI, will it also lead to his superiors? Because he wasn't the beginning and end of all. There are people who are also on top of the hierarchy, over and above him. you talk about a CS, you talk about the PS, you talk about the Inspector General of
What
Police.
was that they're invoking, the prosecution was invoking today?
Yeah.
Of superiors being criminally responsible for actions of their juniors. So how far could that dotted line go?
The highest responsibility.
Right.
So how high can that go?
Yeah.
That top responsibility, where does it stop? At
The
former
sky is the
president?
limit.
Yeah, the sky is the limit.
Yeah.
The former president, the Inspector General, the former minister, the former PS, how far can it go? Put it this way, we are yet to see quite a number of movements in terms of the restructuring of DCI. SSU is now the crack unit on the spotlight. If these officers are going to be charged, I mean, the court session today went quite late to this evening. Hassan Mugambi was there. Whether they will be charged or not is a decision that Chief Magistrate Diana Mochacha will make next week.
Yeah.
So for the time being, those officers remain incarcerated before that decision is made. But suffice to say, we are yet to see the last of these. So many changes are likely to happen at the DCI. Fact is, there are things that went totally wrong in that directorate. And if we listen to what the DPP is saying, and strategically he's saying, I'm not saying this because Kinoti is out.
Yeah.
If these things were happening, then they will need to be resolved. But my question is, when there was this new confidence that finally our judicial system, our criminal justice system is back on track with Kinoti, with DPP, and even with Twalib at ESCC, there was that hope, and we saw a lot of movement.
The triumvirate of
guys being arrested on Friday, being taken to court on Monday.
Yeah.
Then my reading of all this is that all that we were treated to was a farce, was a show. But now also, it is also a confirmation that some of the people who were taken to court not necessarily because there was enough evidence, but to fit a certain political narrative. But now there's also a question. A case like the Ruaraka land scam, you remember that file? It kept moving from one office to another. Are we likely to see it now?
Possibly. But then the other question with that is, if we're saying that in the past, the criminal justice system was used to settle political scores, is it being used to settle political scores in the present, this time around? And those are some of the things that then, are cause for worry and cause for concern with some of the revelations we're seeing, including people who have tenure of office, who have constitutional mandates that protect them and give them the powers to do what they're supposed to do, now saying, well, I was coerced and I wasn't. In other civilized societies, interviews, speeches, admissions like those usually are followed by, where
before LK comes in, I always try to relate with what I call conventional wisdom from Banana. They say there is no thief and a person who is spectating as the theft goes on. I don't know how best I can direct translate it. Like, you can't watch.
Sometimes, just say it in your mother tongue. Sometimes there's something about that.
You can't watch as something is happening and then think you're better off than the person who
because you didn't actually commit.
Yeah, because yet you didn't talk about it. There's no thief and spectator of stealing. Roba is telling me.
There's something about the mother tongue. It's sort of lost in translation, but we get what you're trying to say.
I'm sure in Sinoni there is a similar one.
No, there are fewer thieves there.
Oh, wow.
Even, okay, then give us that one, the one that involves cows.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of more illustrations with cows than there are with thieves. Sorry, Francis, but... Professor Okoth Gendo, a legend of constitution law, spoke of Kenya as a country of constitution without constitutionalism. And I think his illustrations and his assertion always plays out. Because really, we are having the most unnecessary conversation right now as a country. Because we have a beautiful constitution, a constitution that politicians got worried went too far. And indeed it went quite far. Because in the old days, under the old constitution, under the pre-2010 2010 constitution, really the criminal justice system was also still in the hands of politicians. I remember as at the height of one of the murder cases, pre-2010 constitution, I'll not tell you which attorney general, but a case was withdrawn in the era of the famous Nolle Prosequi, you know, where the attorney general will always withdraw cases.
Yeah.
And then there was this private audience in which this attorney general said, you know, the president is the law at the time.
Yep.
And his work as attorney general is to interpret the law to the president. And he said this is how he used to do it. He'll tell the president, this is what the law says, but what do you want? Yeah, so that he finds a way around that. There is a very insistent old culture that is still attending to our conduct of national affairs despite the new constitution. For one, this ongoing illustration, we have a director of criminal prosecution, director of public prosecution, DPP, whose eyes are constantly on the side mirror, rear view. He's looking at the back. He mentions the president a bit too many times for the comfort of those who believe in independent officers. You know, we want to hear you. What are you saying yourself? Don't bring the noises that are coming from your left or right side. Because this constitution is so beautiful, it makes these institutions independent. And I think this is the right time to just say well done to the judiciary. It's not there fully, but we've seen judges that are truly exercising their independence and the independence of the institution in line with the constitution. And I think they have saved a lot of things for the country. They've had the courage to say no to some very difficult things. They have had the courage to also issue orders against very powerful offices like the office of the president and things like that. You know, you can't do that if your eyes and mind are still in the old times, where you actually think, oh, the president will have to tell you what he wants. There are things that are probably discussed between different institutions. And, you know, tomorrow is the State of Justice report will be released by the judiciary, and it will be very interesting to see that, because there's been this celebration of quiet celebration of the improvement of relations between the judiciary and the executive. But I don't think we should mistake civility for loss of independence. Yeah. Be civil with other fellow leaders, be civil with other arms of government, but do your job. The job of criminal justice is very, very difficult. It's a very tough space. Tough for the police, tough for the DPP, tough for the judiciary, tough for everyone that is involved there. It can be potentially very untidy, but the Constitution is so beautiful because it gives you the space to do that. So what we are discussing now is we have a good Constitution. We have a good framework that should enable a well-functioning criminal justice system. It should now be possible to actually charge somebody with corruption and jail them based on the evidence that you have.
And have the cases proceed, you know, fairly quickly.
And expeditiously. Right. If you just follow the law, the Constitution, if you just follow that enables you to do that so independently. So there is one thing that is yet to happen, and that is a mind shift of those people among those people who are actually exercising those offices. But I think there is hope, because when you look at the number of times former President Uhuru Kenyatta was defeated in court, a lot of cases, that in itself is something that we should take note and say, it never used to work that way. In the old days, the president will have his way completely and in whatever he does. So what we're going to look at, especially with regard to the criminal justice system right now, is the simple question of whether politicians are just going to have their way and get their wishes addressed. If it's a case that they don't want, then it collapses, evidence suddenly disappears, because then it won't be the fault of the law, it will be the fault of the people exercising those offices. So the law doesn't work on its own. It also requires people, and people with, I keep insisting, a spine.
Yeah.
Finally, I looked at that interview, I watched it closely, and one fundamental issue came to my mind: honesty. Honesty. And then the binary contrast: great expectation, great disappointment. The last 2 years, 3 years or thereabout, people who were very, very expectant that finally we have got it right in terms of administration of justice. I'm sure a good number of them are greatly disappointed after that interview.
Absolutely. All right, so it's time to wind this conversation down. And today, Mr. Francis Gachuri, son of Banana, I think we want to start with you.
And just before he goes to that, you remember we had some pictures from State House earlier today. If we can take a look.
Right. Yeah.
Both the outgoing cabinet and the incoming one had a lunch session with the
if we can play
President
that.
Ruto,
that was something great. And did they walk in 2 by 2?
Yeah, 2 by 2. It was a perfect political Noah's Ark.
Yes, it was. Incoming and former. By the way, Najib Balala has been appointed to one of the world's premier conservation agencies. It's called the Fauna and Flora Institute, if I'm not wrong, and he'll be sitting on the board of that as a vice president or vice chair of that. He'll be sitting with the great environmentalist Sir David Attenborough. So something for him there. But this was a good show.
This is good, and these are things that really, even regionally and continentally, give us a good name. The level of civility that we are capable of displaying sometimes. I just sometimes wish the rhetoric can follow this kind of civility, because the rhetoric doesn't match. When our politicians speak, when our leaders speak, they speak with a lot of contempt for each other. They speak with rough language. They are very apocalyptic about each other's future and all that. But just look at this. I mean, this is the incoming cabinet and the outgoing cabinet.
Beautiful transition.
Absolutely beautiful transition. And considering the circumstances of the last cabinet, remember Deputy President William Ruto then, I think, could not sit in most of these cabinet sessions because of the rough relations with his former boss. And here, reunited with his former colleagues, and as he bade them farewell, I think this was really decent.
This was decent.
It's decent.
And long may this live, and we should see more of this. And like you say, the statements that are made should actually match gestures such as these ones. So this was actually something really good. And it's interesting that we're talking about transitions, because we have to transition now to Gachuri's punchline, which is about transition.
Absolutely.